What is the most statistically improbable thing that has ever happened to you? In the middle of making an omelette, I answered the door while holding a whole egg. It turned out to be my new neighbor asking if she could borrow an egg. The look of confusion on her face when I produced one on the spot was only matched by my own. She took it and left without saying a word. It was super weird. You should have reached behind her ear and pulled out the egg magician style. That is one hell of a missed opportunity. Next time a new neighbor moves in near me, I'm going to carry about my person an egg, a cup of sugar and a jug of milk. Just in case. The work I used to do required me to carry a lot of keys. At the end of my shift every day, I would go to hang up my keys on a cup hook, but as I entered the room I would toss them over to the board with the hooks, trying to get them to land on the hook. And every day the keys would miss and fall to the floor. I would retrieve them and hang them and sit and do my paperwork. One day, at the end on my shift, I was a bit later than usual and the supervisors were in the room. Again I tossed my keys and they hooked. All of the supervisors were stunned, but my direct supervisor said, "I bet you couldn't ever do that again." I grabbed the keys off the hook, walked over to the door and tossed them again. And again they landed on the hook. And in the 2 years of working there, that was the only 2 times they caught. Was working a wine banquet back in college, on a nice sunny afternoon in a wide open field with no trees. Pretty much everyone was gone and we were wrapping up after a long day. I yawned, and the only bird for miles shit right in my mouth as he flew by, the ducker. That and the brain aneurysm that I had about a 1 out of 25,000 chance of surviving, but I'm still here, looking for that goddamned bird. I've been saving a bottle of X-Lax just for him. Kaka mother ducker. A guy with the same name and same birth date as me died. I was doing a job at the law firm where his will was held on the day of the reading. They freaked out and asked me to confirm a bunch of details to make sure I hadn't died. A bunch of details. So, you dead? Nope. Yeah, sure? Yep. My brother and I were playing Excite Bike 64 in our younger days. There's a game mode where you climb a super steep cliff. The first time one of us ever reached the top we both unanimously whispered, "Mufasa." It scared the shit out of both of us, and I cried out of fear for probably 10 minutes. I think the word you're looking for is simultaneously. I found a random orange on the street while walking to school. I picked it up and tossed it down a driveway, and it landed right up against a car's back tire. When I was walking home, the car backed out of the driveway and as it drove over the orange it sprayed all over me. I ran up the rear end of a taxi twice on the same night. The first time I was going clubbing with mates, he'd locked his brakes and I drove straight up the backside. We exchanged details etc. After the club we were driving back, I thought the cabin front looked familiar. He locked his brakes again. I smashed him again. He gets out and turns white. Why? Edit. This was 20 years ago. Hey wow. This reminded me of when I used to drive taxis. It was a Saturday night, and I had got a job to pick up a fare at, and I'll never forget it, from XX Serpentine Avenue Baldwin to go into town. It's around 8 PM when I pick this couple up, and take them to a restaurant in the CBD, and go off on my merry way taxiing around town. About 4 hours later, around 12:30 AM, I've had another 20 plus jobs and driven randomly for about 250 kilometers all over town, and I'm now back in the CBD. I lock my doors and roll down the passenger window a few inches, so I can ask folks where they're going. Cause I don't want big fares taking me far away, and have to return empty, or have folks fighting over who got the taxi, and as I'm stopped at an intersection, this woman runs up and asks to go to the other end of town to a nightclub. I say, sure, and let her in, and then I realize she's with a guy, and it's the same couple from Serpentine Avenue. Hey trippy. Funny cool, we have a laugh at the coincidence, and I take them to go clubbing and I taxi off. At about 4 AM, I've done another 20 plus jobs and another 200 to 300 kilometers all around town, and I find myself in a line of taxis double parked outside a few nightclubs. I'm about 6th in line. People come out of the clubs, and soon I'm first, when the back door opens and a couple jump in the back of my cab and say, XX Serpentine Avenue. Well, call me Rosie and duck me dead. We were completely blown away. Once is a fair, twice is a coincidence, 3 times is just some duckin' trippy, weird ass mother duckin' woo. Taxiland was pretty trippy in general. For me, I had some amazing times. Girls, drugs, drunk bikies et al. I've had a lot of crazy shit happen to me in my life, but this was about as statistically improbable as it gets, at least for me. Whilst on honeymoon I bumped into my best friend from high school. In Venice, Italy. I hadn't seen him for 14 years. He lives in Australia. I live in England. Twist, you married each other and were on your honeymoon together. If that's true, they probably did a lot of bumping into each other. I threw an orange at this bully's bike as he rode away, and it bounced once, so perfectly, that it dislodged his chain and the bike abruptly stopped, and he was thrown off. He stood up a bloody, crying mess, but oh boy, I was a hero. Edit. To everyone saying I was the bully, there was some backstory to this. I was over at my friend's house when this kid, Paul, comes over as well. Now Paul is a bully. So we're just hanging out in my friend's backyard when Paul runs around back and starts, basically, insulting us. My friend went in to get his mom, and that scared Paul. I was not so decent as to be patient, so the above transpired. And it was an orange because Florida. I've been the millionth visitor to a ton of websites. I won a Frosted Flakes sweepstakes competition about 10 years ago. I was a kid and my mom filled out the form that was on the back of the box and sent it in, and I ended up winning an all expenses paid trip to California, a PlayStation 2, and a shitload of money amongst other things. I always had thought sweepstakes were a scam, and companies never followed through, but it turns out there actually are winners. Nice try, Mr. Kellogg. Next you're going to tell us cornflakes cure masturbation. They can if you forcefully shove them into your urethra. Pretty hard to masturbate with sugar frosted crumbs in your donk. I was sitting on the couch with my 2-year-old son, eating frosted flakes out of the box. He was naked, as toddlers tend to be. I look over and he's rubbing the frosted flakes on his penis, then eating them. I yell, "What are you doing?" And his response to the look of horror on my face was to grab all of the pieces around him and furiously rub them on his penis and eat them before I could take them away. I never thought that story would be useful outside of using it to embarrass him during my speech at his wedding. I was teaching ESL in Korea, and we went out one night to a local bar that had a monthly open mic night, where a lot of us foreigners would gather. I got chatting with a random white guy at the bar and asked where he was from. He said Ottawa. I was like, no way, I used to live in Ottawa. Whereabouts in Ottawa did you live? He answered, Sandy Hill. I once again said, no way. Haha, I had a car stolen that was found there. His face goes slack. Was it an 88 to 91 Honda Civic? Yes. Yeah, I think that was me. Let me get your drinks for the night. TLDR, while traveling in Korea, I met the guy who had stolen my car 4 years earlier in Ottawa. I stood on a venomous snake by accident, but escaped unhurt because I stood on its head. Once when I was surfing I stepped on a stingray's head, and very narrowly jumped before he whipped his stinger forward to hit me. I felt like Spider-Man the whole day. When I was at university, I would quite often get a taxi ride after a night out, from a nice old man nicknamed Grandpa. He had Grandpa on his taxi license, and had business cards with Grandpa on them, etc. He would always give you cheap rides and come whenever you called. Anyway, 4 years or so passed without me getting a ride from him. I had heard rumors that he had died, which was quite saddening. About a month or so ago a couple mates and I were waiting to get picked up by a taxi, when I decided to tell them about the story of Grandpa. So eventually I finished my story and our taxi arrived, with none other than Grandpa at the wheel. I got pulled over by the police, because my car and the car in front of me had the same license plate. Edit. Wow, this blew up. Sorry I'm late. I was sitting at lights behind a wee black Vauxhall, with a police car behind me. Next thing I know, the police are asking us both to pull over. We both had the same license plate. Turns out that both cars were registered at the same dealership on the same day. A clerical error had led to both getting the same plate. Months later, we are both sitting at the same traffic light and the police are there to see it. This happened in Glasgow, Scotland, about 10 years ago. Plates are unique in the United Kingdom. The format at the time was LNNN, LLL, L equals letter, N equals number. This has got to be unlikely. I was on holiday at Universal Studios Florida, with my brother-in-law Nick, we're both Brits, when a random family rush over, start hugging and kissing him and speaking Spanish. Nick was very confused, until he heard them call him Chris. It turns out the family are Peruvian and live next door to Nick's identical twin Chris, who moved out to Peru 4 years earlier. I'd love someone to calculate the odds of that. Once walking out of a grocery store, me and a buddy did that pew 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 gun thing with our hands, and said something, pretty stoned, to some guy who was about to step into the parking lot, and he stopped for half a second to glare at us. In that half second, some douche duck driver sped by and would have smashed the guy. We all did a double take and went on our ways. You shot a man to life. I drove to the park to go running, using my cell phone as GPS. When I was done I put my phone on the top of my car and spent a few minutes stretching. Then I got in my car and drove home. On the way home, driving about 35 with the window down, I took a turn, and the cell phone slid off the roof of the car and into my open window, bouncing off my arm and landing in my lap. I never told anyone because I didn't think they'd believe me. Picked up the phone to call someone, only to hear them talking while I dialed their number. They had called me at that exact moment. Was weird. I dropped my toast once and it landed butter side up. The only conclusion is that you buttered the wrong side. A scientist called Dr. Carl actually did some investigation into this. Turns out the average height of a table means that a piece of toast knocked off a table or bench will almost always land butter side down, because it only has time to complete a half revolution. If you eat your toast on top of the refrigerator however, you have a much better chance of it landing butter side up. Were you eating your toast on the fridge? I was in perfect health at 23, but had a stroke. Pretty harsh one, was in a coma for 2 days. When I woke up at the 8,000 employee hospital, they told me I was the first guy ever at my age to come down with something like that. They ran me through every test they had for 3 days, and concluded I had a blood clot in my leg, somehow. Sent me back home, and 3 weeks later it happened again.